Welcome to Discovering Dimensions of Wellness. My name is Carly. I'm currently a Master's of Public Health student here at the University of Florida. I'm in my last semester, so for my capstone project, I've had the privilege to work alongside some amazing people you'll meet here today and later on in the sessions in creating this wellness program for you guys. So our mission for this program is to educate UF and UF employees about the dimensions of wellness to empower employees to create healthier lifestyles. So we'll talk more about what those dimensions of wellness are. So here are the 7 components that make up wellness. You have emotional, physical, environmental, spiritual, social, financial, and intellectual. So it's important to note that these are all very intertwined with each other. And I'll describe more what it means to have, for example, like financial wellness on the next slide here. So emotional wellness is going to be your ability to successfully handle life stressors and adapt to change. Your physical wellness is keeping up a healthy body through your nutrition and physical activity. Your environmental wellness is going to include the quality of your indoor and outdoor environment. Then we have your spiritual wellness. So that's finding your purpose, value, and meaning in your life. Your social wellness is developing and maintaining positive social relationships. Your financial wellness is a feeling of satisfaction related to current and future finances. And then lastly, your intellectual wellness is going to be finding creative ways to improve your knowledge and skills. So if you were to add something into your lifestyle, for example, we're talking about gardening today, that's going to affect multiple of these dimensions. So for example, that's going to increase your physical activity. You're getting outside in the environment. Gardening has been shown to also improve your mental health. So, and you're also improving a skill. It's something, especially if you haven't gardened before, it's that intellectual like knowledge that you're gaining. So very important to think about as we're going through the different topics throughout this employee wellness program, how maybe one activity we talk about can fit into these multiple dimensions. So here's our program overview. Today, we're going to be talking about the dimension of wellness and gardening. On Wednesday, February 8th, that's going to be our second module with mental health and stress management. On February 22nd, we're going to be talking about physical activity and the UF health and wellness resources available to you as employees. On March 8th, we're going to be talking about the healthy local and seasonal eating. And then on March 23rd, we actually are going to have an optional wrap-up event, and I'll talk more about these in the coming slides. So today, Cynthia Nazario-Leary is going to be talking about gardening. She's an environmental horticultural extension agent and a master gardener volunteer coordinator with Alachua County. So some of the things we're going to be talking about today is plant selection, garden design, pest and disease management, harvesting, maintenance, and navigating the climate here at UF. For Module 2, we'll be talking about mental health and stress management. We have Samantha Kennedy. She's our County Extension Director of Wakulla County. And then we have Heather Janey. She's the County Extension Director of Columbia County. So they're going to be talking about self-preservation strategies, developing your hobbies and passions, practicing a positive health habits, working more efficiently, life balancing models, and creating a personalized action plan. I do want to let you know this isn't a comprehensive list. I just want to give you guys a taste of what each of these modules are going to be including. So for the physical activity and UF health and wellness resources, I'll be talking to you about physical activity, and Angie Brown, our Director of UF Communications and Work Life, will be covering those resources that are actually available for you as employees here. So we'll be talking about the daily and weekly recommendations that are current for physical activity, which actually just changed in 2020. We have types of physical activity. What's the difference between moderate and vigorous intensity, and how can you identify that when you're exercising? developing an exercise routine based on individual goals, benefits of physical activity, and then resources. So Module 4, the healthy local and seasonal eating. We have Martha Maddox. She's our Family and Consumer Science Extension Agent for Alachua County. And we also have Catherine Campbell. She's our Assistant Professor and Extension Specialist of Community Food Systems. So they're going to be talking about preparing healthy recipes, the local and seasonal products that are available, how to reduce food waste and increase food preservation, food canning, and food safety. Lastly, our wrap-up event, like I mentioned, this is optional for you guys, but we will be meeting in person at the Gainesville's Farmer Market. This is held at the Heartwood Soundstage on Thursdays. It's from 4 to 7 p.m. And then right across the street from that is actually Depot Park. So we thought about meeting up there, maybe going for a nice walk, getting some physical activity in. And then we also have a veggie meter, which is really interesting. And maybe Dr. Campbell can talk a little bit more about it, but it basically is going to give you a number that kind of can tell like how much vegetable and fruits that you consume. So really interesting, cool device to come try out and kind of just get a baseline number for yourself. Okay. Do you guys have any questions that I could answer about the employee wellness program? All right, I'm going to hand it over to Cynthia then to start us off with the gardening.
Great. Thank you so much, Carly, for that introduction and for putting all the modules together to see, how this fits in. This presentation is going to fit into the bigger picture of everything. So today we're going to talk about gardening and wellness, basically how those things are related, and how, especially here in Florida, it's a great way to get outside, to probably get on all those 7 wellnesses points, to be able to get outside, get some exercise. And then for me, especially someone who's also a transplant here to Florida, I actually moved here from Hawaii. It's, gardening has really let me learn about the environment here, and learn about all the different seasons that we have. Okay, so benefits, the benefits of gardening, right? I coordinate Master Gardener volunteers. So for them, Master Gardeners love gardening and they love plants. It brings them joy. But some direct benefits are exercise and being outdoors, as was mentioned, enjoying that outdoor environment, that fresh air, sunshine. Also the emotional well-being, and that enjoyment that you get and the ability to reduce stress, as well as the connection to eating healthy and potential economic savings. So I'm going to go into each one of these a little bit. So exercise. I laughed when I was doing this presentation because I got a call from my mom just the other day, and she's in her mid-70s. And gardening is her form of exercise. She always tells me, I pruned the hedges the other day and, I got my arm workout for the day. And it's very true. Just doing some gardening, there's all different types of gardening that you can do that can work both your upper body and your lower body. So I loved some of these fun facts that I found. 30 minutes of digging and shoveling burns about 150 calories. So that's like similar to riding a stationary bike. You can also burn calories trimming shrubs. I've experienced that with those, like in this picture with the loppers. You are going to be doing some serious arm workout there. And then raking leaves. My 13-year-old will attest to this, that he burns calories and energy while raking the leaves in the yard. And then, of course, mowing the lawn, even just, going out there and doing the weekly or biweekly lawn mowing, you're going to be burning calories. The other thing with gardening is that, you're moving up and down, you're usually reaching. So it really enables you to strengthen joints and maybe use muscles that you're not going to be, using in other activities. So just, 30 minutes of gardening can really add, add some exercise and physical activity to your day. So emotional well-being is probably, when most people ask me about, the benefits of gardening, it's one that doesn't seem as tangible, but I think we all feel it a lot of times when we're in the garden or we're connecting with nature. It's that feeling that we get, like almost like that reset button, that helps us maybe deal with the stress or helps us refocus, and get our mind off of something. I did want to bring up, there's some really excellent programs that we have here in Florida. There's a therapeutic horticultural program. It's right on campus. It's at the Wilmot Gardens, and it's run by Dr. Leah Deal, who's pictured here. And she runs a wonderful program where they use gardening and horticultural techniques to use as a therapy for people with varying illnesses or issues, from physical, like cancer related, to mental or stress related. And then there's also an American Horticultural Therapy Association that, if you were interested in this, I would encourage you to take a look at it. We actually have a program where you can get trained in therapeutic horticulture, so that you can work with those individuals and using gardening as a tool. And then also recently we had a University of Florida, they published an article where they had a study, and I believe Dr. Deal was involved with this. They had a group of healthy women that had never gardened before, and they monitored, and it showed that the gardening activities lowered stress, anxiety, and depression. So to me, that's just, and there's lots of other great research studies that have been shown. There's also studies with youth as well to show that, gardening really helps us in that emotional well-being area. I like this one because this is why we garden at home, is so that I can encourage my kids to explore and try and eat a diverse diet, include some of those green veggies in there. But studies have found that when you're eating fresh vegetables, those vegetables are fresher, they're going to be higher in nutrient value than vegetables that are usually at your store that have taken a while to get there. Now, maybe some of your local farmers markets and so forth have pretty fresh stuff. But in terms of usually produce travels a very far way just to get to our stores. And so if you're able to harvest something fresh from the garden, there's nothing like something that's fresh and flavorful coming straight from the garden after you've washed it, of course. But it also can be more nutritionally rich as well. The other study that I thought was really interesting was that gardening can increase consumption of fruits and vegetables, but that it really only takes one individual in the household to be doing it to influence everybody else. So I kind of patted myself on the back there that I am the one individual gardening in our household. And so hopefully this is, filtering down into my kids' eating habits. So I encourage, if you want to be that one person that gets everybody in your household eating healthier. And then, of course, there's economic savings. If you're growing your own food, there's a potential that you could be saving money. As we are an extension, we've received a lot of requests and information on how to grow chickens because the price of eggs has gone up. And so people are interested in having their own chickens. But I think a lot of times what happens with this is a lot of people forget that there's other inputs that go in that you have to account for. So, having a garden and using it as a garden was a way to save money, which during COVID, that became a big thing. And also during World War II, they had victory gardens to grow food. But you do want to make sure that you're accounting for all your costs. So, if you need, for all the inputs that you're going to be putting into the garden, including your time and your effort, so that the true cost of how much it is. And then, there's nothing like growing a tomato and then, the cost of that tomato is maybe, much less at the store than it was for you to grow. But there's also other benefits too, right? I mean, learning how to grow a tomato, there's all that knowledge that you have that you learn to grow that tomato, and that has value as well. So I definitely want to encourage people. I don't want to discourage people from growing or not trying to save money with their garden, because I think you can, but just understand that there are those costs out there. And the University of Florida, IFAS has a great cost and benefits of vegetable gardening EDIS handout. If you're interested and wanting to kind of figure that out for your family or your household, I encourage you to check that out. They have a nice little worksheet on there as well. So we know about all the benefits, right? Now we want to garden. We're ready to garden. So what do you have to do, especially if you haven't gardened before, or maybe you're new to Florida and you're not sure when is the right time to garden or what to garden here. Garden planning is really essential when you're gardening, and it doesn't have to be very intricate or involved. I always encourage people to start small and, expand from there. But there are some things that you might want to start thinking about when you're thinking about gardening is what can you plant? Sorry, that was a repeated question there on my presentation. I meant to say, what can you plant? And, oh, I do. When can you plant it? So think about the things that you like to garden. What is it that you've always maybe wanted to grow? That was why I kind of asked that question, is that usually if you're growing something that you want to grow, that you want to taste, or, that you've always wanted to try out, you're going to be more willing and you're going to put more effort into growing that. So if you've always wanted to grow tomatoes, grow tomatoes. If you've always wanted to have an herb garden, try that first. For your garden type, where are you going to do this? This can really depend on where you live and how much maybe yard or space that you have. But what's really great about gardening is there's usually something that you can grow somewhere, even if it's inside. The LED lights have, the LED lights have basically reduced the cost of lighting. So there's definitely a lot of things that now you can grow inside with the LED lights, and you can even grow some vegetables. But there are some things to consider there, because there's some plants that are more amenable to growing in containers and inside and on patios versus those that need that full sun and need to be out in that space. So that leads to plant spacing and arrangement. How much space do you have to grow something? And then how are you going to start this? How much time do you have? Can you grow something from seed? Or maybe you want to try growing something from transplants because they kind of give you a head start. Or you're going to try propagating something vegetatively, take a cutting from something and then try and grow it from there. So thinking about how you want to go about doing this. And we're going to kind of go through all these questions too, so that by the end, hopefully you're able to answer these questions when you're starting your garden. So gardening in Florida, lots of people garden here. Here in north central, northeast Florida, depending on where you are. But we have, we're kind of in that funny spot. We're very temperate, but we're also kind of subtropical as well. We kind of blur those lines. And so it's exciting in that there's things that you can grow here that, you certainly can't grow further north. But then there's things that you have to account for, because we have these distinct kind of, seasons. We have a very hot, humid summer. And then in the winter, it tends to get drier. And then of course, as we all experienced this past December, there was a series of 5 days where we had where temperatures dropped into freezing. So that's going to impact, how you garden and what you're able to garden. So spring is very popular because that's what most people think about gardening. And now is actually a really good month to think about if there's something that you want to grow in the spring, you can get a head start by growing them inside now, and then they'll be ready to, outplant into the garden or into your outdoor containers come the spring. Usually we recommend unless the plants are hardy to a light freeze, we really recommend holding off on doing any of the planting until that the threat of freeze has passed, and that's about mid-March. Although with the way climate is now, we can never make any promises. There might be a freeze in April, but it's usually pretty rare. Summer is least popular, as many of you can guess. If any of you have lived here over the summer, you know why summer is probably not very popular. It is just very hot and humid outside, and so it just makes gardening really hard. You have to kind of really, maybe aim to garden early in the morning or maybe later in the afternoons. But even then, it's still pretty humid. There's a lot of insects, a lot of pest pressures. So summer is for certain species that can handle that, and including yourself. So a lot of gardeners here almost treat our summer like they would maybe in up north as their winter. It's the time where we put the gardens to bed. Maybe we plant a cover crop, or maybe we cover it and we wait for the fall to do another planting. Fall and winter is I feel like it's our secret garden time here in Florida. It's one of the best times to garden. There's a lot of things that you can grow here. And what's happening is that the temperatures kind of cool and the air dries out. You have less pest pressures. It's definitely more enjoyable to be outside. And there's just lots of things that, can grow. You do have to deal with that. There's less daylight hours, right? Our days are shorter. And then of course there is the freezes that you do need to monitor. But other than that, I feel like those are things you can kind of prepare for. Whereas that you can't always prepare for insects and diseases and stuff. So it's one of my favorite times is to garden in this fall winter time. And then average size 300 to 600 square feet. So not very big. Here in Florida, people have lanais, people have patios. There's definitely lots of things you can do in a small space. And again, the major problems, as I've talked about, we have very sandy soils, pests, and diseases related to weather. So thinking about, where you want to have your garden is always kind of think of where you want to put it. And this is really key because you need that full sun. When you're doing a vegetable garden, most of those vegetable garden plants that you're going to include in there need about 5 to 6 hours of full sun. That's not dappled sun, that's full sun. So the best place to really, to have a garden, if you're going to do it outside, is thinking about the south side of your house, or maybe a southeast. You could also potentially do a southwest. Just know that the western sun is going to be a lot hotter than the eastern sun because it's the end of the day. And so there's a lot of radiant heat in the environment as well. If anybody's ever noticed the west side of your house can get quite hot in the afternoons. So you want to make sure that you're placing it where it can get that sun. The north side of the house can be more shaded. And so I usually don't recommend putting a vegetable garden on that side. You want to make sure you have access to water. You're going to need to water your plants. And so if you don't have a hose bib nearby, or if it's not convenient, you're just not going to water them. So I always tell people, make sure you have a water source and that it's convenient for you, because you will need to water them. You're welcome to set up irrigation. If you're knowledgeable of irrigations, there's lots of great kits now. But again, they need to be near some sort of water source to be able to work effectively. And then also think about the surrounding plants. I made this mistake when I first moved into our house. We had a very large water oak. There was these wonderful camellias under it. I thought, oh, I'm just going to add some more camellias to this group of other camellias. And the plant died no matter what I did. I dug a big enough hole. I gave it lots of organic matter, lots of fertilizer, well, not lots, but the right amount of fertilizer, the watering, you know, I was babying this thing and it still died. And what I realized is that the water oak really competes for all the nutrients and water in that area. And those other camellias had been there before the tree was established. So they kind of had been able to adjust to the tree being in that area. But it was very difficult to add a new plant to it as long as this tree was there. So having an understanding that if you have existing landscaping, you don't want to plant near those roots because they will take away from whatever you're going to be putting down. And then really importantly is well-drained soils. I don't know really any vegetables that like to have their roots wet for a long period of time. So you always want to make sure that the water is draining. If you find that you're in an area where it's not draining very well and that floods frequently, consider planting a rain garden there and using plants that don't mind having their feet wet, like reeds and sedges and maybe some other grasses. But vegetables, it's going to be really hard to grow in those areas. So the next thing you'll want to do is thinking about the garden design, and there are so many resources for this. If you're a beginner, I really strongly recommend trying the square foot gardening method. It's a great method. There's lots of information on it, and basically you basically garden within a square and then squares within that square, and each square basically, they'll tell you like you need 4 1-by-1 squares to grow this. You need 2 squares to grow this type of plant. And it's basically accounting for the fact that that plant is going to grow and spread. And so it's almost a plant by numbers. We have the color by numbers. Well, if you want to garden by numbers, I recommend square foot gardening. I also recommend downloading and reading the Florida Vegetable Gardening Guide. Everything I've put in this presentation comes from here, is mentioned in here. And so this one is probably, whenever somebody comes into our extension office and wants to know about growing vegetables or starting a garden, this is what we give them, because really all the information that you'll need, especially to get started, is in there. And then if you wanted to do square foot gardening, Extension offers workshops. I even do a whole separate presentation just on square foot gardening, but lots of information available on that. And it's really fun. You can fit it into a small space. Kids love it. It's really good for school gardens as well. Like I said, plant by numbers. As I mentioned earlier in the beginning of the talk, you can do container gardening. I am a big fan of container gardening because I like to be mobile. I like to be able to move my plants around. I have a large patio, but it doesn't always get sun everywhere I want it to. And especially in the winter, that's different than the summer. So I have everything in pots, and then that way I move the pots around. It also enables me to make sure that anything that may not grow well in the soil, maybe your soil pH, which we'll talk about, is too high or too low for that plant. Then I say try growing it in a container, because then you can control the soil media. So especially if they're like specialty plants, or you're not sure how they're going to respond in the yard, try growing them in a container. When you're growing in a container, the main thing is to make sure that the media that you're using is well aerated and has good soil moisture retention. You never want things to be swampy and wet in your pot. You want to water them, get them moist, but then have really good drainage so that water and air are continuing to move through the pot and keep those roots breathing. And then choose appropriate plants. Not all plants are going to be right for containers, but you'd be surprised. A lot of vegetables you can get to grow in a container. And then don't forget to water these, because one of the main reasons why container plants die is either too much watering or too little watering. Too much means and especially if they didn't have good drainage, the plants drown. Too little, the plants, the pots dry out very quickly, and and then they basically they don't have enough water, and so they wilt. So watering is key with the container. Good, adequate watering. Plant arrangement and timing. These are all details that are also mentioned in that vegetable guide, but I just want to go over them briefly. You can plant all different ways, and you can do this within the square foot gardening too, is you can try and grow things so that they pair up better, right? So that you can be more efficient maybe with your time and your space. And so thinking about what type of plant you have, how it's going to live, how big it's going to get, maybe what family it's in, those are all going to help you decide, how much of it you want to plant, where you want to plant it, maybe what things you want to plant it with. And I know it seems overwhelming, but that's why I always tell people, start small, start with a few plants, or maybe just even one plant. And then as you get comfortable, you can start to play around with all these like different combinations. Some tips here at the bottom, and they'll come up again, but always rotate, especially if you're planting in the ground. Think about changing it up because you want to keep those pests and diseases guessing. They figure it out. They figure out what plants are where. And so if you can keep things moving around or have things intermixed when you plant them, then you're more likely to kind of confuse the pests. We also have nematodes here. Nematodes are a very small microscopic worm that lives in the ground. And there's beneficial nematodes, but there's also harmful nematodes, and they will basically suck your plants dry. You usually see them wilting. And usually when you dig up your plant, you'll see that your plant has no roots, or the roots are very knotted and gnarly. And that's because they've been infected with nematodes, and they can be very hard to control. So always my recommendation is, if you notice that, try planting something in a container, or, move it to another spot so that you can give, those nematodes will move off somewhere else. Some other things that you can do too is succession planting. So I think we might have all known somebody. I know plenty of folks that grow things in their yard, then they have a harvest. And like my mom, when I was growing up, she loved chard, but she would just grow tons of chard. And so I felt like we were always eating chard just to keep up with the amount of chard we had. So think about how much you're going to grow and how much you're going to produce. You can spread it out. You don't have to grow everything at once. And a lot of times that extends your season as well. Just be wary of the length of the season, and if you're getting into a cool season or if it's going to get warm. That's where, to me, the fall and winter season is great, because you have a little bit more buffer knowing that you're going into spring. If you plant something late, there is that worry of a freeze and cooler temperatures, but I tell you what, if you plant too late in the spring, that summer heat hits around May, June, and man, it's just as bad as the cold in terms of what it can do to some of these plants. So kind of knowing what your growing season is and what time you have to get things planted is going to be really key for growing in Florida. So just some examples, and I just want to say that Master Gardener volunteers, as well as myself, we give talks on these every spring and fall, because there's always people interested in these two growing seasons that we have. So some examples of some warm season veggies are your beans, your corn, your cucumbers, your eggplant. I think I recall at the very beginning, there were people that were interested in growing tomatoes and peppers and herbs. Those tomatoes and peppers, it's a really great time, those warm season vegetables. Some of them are even really good during the summer. So they're one of the few plants that you can actually grow during the summer, are those tomatoes, peppers, and even some of the cucumbers. And then you have your cool season. Like I said, there's a lot that you can still grow in the cool season, but the veggies that we typically think of and who tend to have some amount of cold tolerance are your broccolis, your cabbage, your carrots, your collards, your kales, and onions and radishes, and a lot of different types of lettuce. If you go out right now to the farms, or if you see, a school garden or community garden, these are usually what you're going to be seeing right now. And I was really impressed that the people that were able to cover their kale, or their collards with a freeze cloth, that a lot of them did really well, survived through that freeze, and they look amazing. This is another resource that we have at UF IFAS. I think it's fun that for every month they have this. So if you go to this link down below, or if you just looked up edible garden calendar UF IFAS, this would pop up. But basically they have this for every month, and they, whatever month it is on the main page. And it's basically a guide to tell you, oh, this is a good time to plant these things if you're in the north. And so we're right here, right on that border, Alachua County. So you could also probably consult this central column as well if you live here. We're not going to talk too much about microclimates, but there's an opportunity too, if you do want to grow some like subtropicals or some, plants that require some warmer temperatures, you can actually create those microclimates in your garden to do so. So another real good resource for if you're not sure about what to grow. And then this is a local program that we're doing. So we're collaborating with Alachua County, as well as Grow Hub, to provide a Alachua plant of the month. And we have a podcast, and we put out a web post. So we have a website where you can read about it. There's basically one plant has been highlighted, and we talk about not only how to grow it, but how to prepare it as well. So going all the way from, growing it to ways to eat it. So if you have an opportunity, check that out as well. All right, so you've planned your garden and now you are ready to plant, right? And we talked about, okay, well, what does that mean? Are we going to do seeds? Are we going to do transplants? So these are some of the questions you need to ask. Is it going to be early? Are you starting right now in January for that spring planting? Or, maybe is it March, and now you're thinking about having a garden? How often is the vegetable going to be harvested? Radishes, you're probably going to only harvest once. You can grow a lot of radish fairly quickly, and you can grow a lot in a very small space. So maybe that's, and you can only eat so many radishes too. So maybe that's only a one-time planting. And also, when you harvest the radish, you're harvesting the whole thing. So if you're gonna have radish over the season, you're gonna need to, successionally plant that. You're gonna need to keep planting new radish seeds to keep it going all season long. Whereas a pepper plant, you're going to grow one pepper plant, or maybe you'll have a few pepper plants, but that one pepper plant is going to produce fruit over the season. And then I talked about that staggered planting. So, you're going to try and space things out so you can get things over the season. That can also, I like to stagger plant just because I don't necessarily know sometimes the sweet spot for when something's going to really, take off. And so if you start too early, maybe those plants don't do well, but the next set then just take off and do amazing. And so it really informs you as to, what is the really good time to plant those, especially if there's any like scientists out there, ones that, want to study what's happening in their garden. Doing those staggering plantings can really inform you as to when is the really great time for that plant. And then ability to transplant. So if you are starting early, let's say you're starting now and you're putting them in little seed trays, does that plant, is it amenable to transplanting? So usually plants that we harvest for the root, so like carrots or the radishes, we tend to do direct seed. Because if you take that plant and you do it as a transplant, you are disturbing that root system every time you move it from one container to another or into the ground. And since the root is what we're trying to harvest, we don't want to disturb that. So there's definitely some plants that are more amenable to transplants than others. And we'll cover that. So again, seed versus transplanting, type of seed, as I talked about, the sensitivity of the roots. If the plant is sensitive, does not like its roots touched, which some of them don't, then you don't want to transplant that. You want to directly put that in. Time of year or length of time till harvest. I get this a lot with tomatoes. If you want to grow tomatoes from seed, I encourage you to start growing them now and then transplant them in the spring, because it takes so long to get your tomatoes to develop. Now, if you find yourself in March and you still want to plant tomatoes, I encourage you to go buy a young tomato plant and work with that instead of starting with seed, because if you start from seed, you're not going to get your tomato harvest in time before the peak of the heat season. And if your tomatoes aren't adapted to heat or whatever, then they're going to not produce as well. So it really depends on, how close you are to the peak season of when that plant needs to be harvested. And the closer you are to when it should be harvested, then you're going to be wanting to work with either a transplant or a larger seedling than dealing with seeds. You want to think about the cost of seed or the cost of transplants. Of course, seed is going to be cheaper than a plant. Plants usually cost more money. But like I said, they're going to allow you to start later in the season. And then the number of plants needed. If you need a ton of plants, you're probably going to want to start from seed or have multiple cuttings. If you only need a few plants, then maybe you can go and buy those plants individually. And then consider if you're going to try and start seeds, let's say in the summertime, make sure that they have some shade cloth so that they don't get burnt out by the sun. And similarly, if you're starting seeds now, make sure that they tend to want to germinate usually in the 70 to 80 degree range. So they might need a little heating pad underneath the seed tray to get really good germination. So here are some transplant ability. So basically plants that easily survive transplanting. You've got your arugula, your beets, your broccoli, your Brussels sprouts. A lot of those cool season crops do really well as transplants. And then ones that maybe you have to think about whether they're worth it, like carrots. I know some people who have been able to transplant carrots. I've had more success by direct seeding those. Same with potatoes. And then the ones that have these strong root systems, again, you definitely want to sow from seed. And then again, this is all available on the UF IFAS, or contact your local extension office. We can share all this information with you. So some advantages, and I've kind of gone through this already, but seeds also, you're going to have a lot more variety. And of course, there's so many seed catalogs. I'm a seed catalog junkie. I love looking at seed catalogs. But you really want to, with the seeds, you want to look at to make sure that they're that variety can tolerate heat or humidity if they're going to be grown during the summer or near the summertime. Or that maybe have been developed for Florida or for some of the southern states. Usually the seed catalogs will let you know about that. Or maybe there's a certain pest pressure. And so a lot of times you can find a seed that of a particular variety that has that resistance. Grow Hub, which is here in Gainesville, they sell local seed. And if you can get local seed, I usually always encourage to try and get local seed first, because those plants are adapted to this climate in this particular area. So the seeds they produce are more likely to really succeed here. And then, as I mentioned, these are some of the plants that, if you're going to get seeds for, these are the ones to get it, because you won't be able to do transplants with them as well. So in terms of other things, I know that there was some people who mentioned some herbs. I think there was like lavender and basil. I think herbs are a great first plant for your garden. It was my first plant. Basil was the first thing I ever grew, I think, for my garden. And the ability to use it fairly quickly. Most of the herbs, you're using the leaves or the stems, so you don't need to wait for it to flower or fruit. So herbs can be really easy, and you can usually get several crops of them, right? Many of these, you're not trying to keep forever. The basil plant grows, it does its thing, and then it dies off. So, if you don't at first succeed, you can always try again. And there's lots of different herbs that you can use. I think in terms of also helping with that healthy diet and encouraging to try new things, herbs add flavor to your food. And so it's great to be able to, we have a little herb garden in our kitchen, and it's just so nice to be like, oh, you know what? I'm going to add some fresh basil to this, or I'm going to add some fresh mint to really, perk up this dish, or really add something to it. So I encourage, if there's beginner gardeners out there and you're not sure where to start with herbs. The other thing great about herbs is that you can let them go to flower, and most of them are going to provide flowers for pollinators and for other beneficial insects. So they're a real great addition to the garden. And then, especially if you're growing outside or you have your containers outside, don't forget about those pollinators. For many of the fruit crops that we have here in Florida, you're going to need a pollinator so that you get fruit set. So like if you're thinking about blueberries or apples or nectarines or any of those fruit trees or fruit shrubs, you're going to need pollinators to help you get good fruit set. So the more beneficial insects you can attract to your garden, you're not only going to reduce the number of bad insects, or problem insects, as I like to call them, but you're also going to be, having healthier plants and better fruit set or better production in your plants. So if you're not sure, go ahead and just add some flowers. Coreopsis is a great plant. It's native to this area. But zinnias, or like I said, letting any of your herbs go to flower, they're all going to attract really great beneficial insects. And then, of course, contact our office. We have information about doing butterfly gardening and all sorts of gardening to attract beneficial insects. So I'm going to try and go through this really quick because I wanted to make sure. I know I'm almost out of time. So these are your basic things that you need to prepare your garden. You're going to need soil, fertilizer, water, and then you're going to need some form of pest disease management. So real quick, soil. If you're not sure about your soil and where you're growing it, as long as it's not the potting soil, but if you're planting directly into the ground, get a soil test done. They're about $10. You can get them done through the University of Florida. You can come to our extension office. We'll show you how it's done. It's pretty straightforward. It's going to tell you what your soil needs. And most importantly, it's going to guide you as to what plants you can put there, because soil pH really determines what nutrients are available to plants. So I encourage everybody, if you're not sure, go ahead and do a soil test. Organic matter, organic matter, organic matter. That's mulches, compost, green waste, that's, even maybe lightly decomposed. All those things are going to add organic matter to your soil. And particularly in Florida, we have sandy soils, which means we don't have a lot of organic matter included in our soils already. And this organic matter, it's going to buffer, it's going to help with soil moisture retention. It's going to help with buffering fertilizers or any nutrients you add. And it's just going to really support the growth of your plants. And in some cases, you may not even have to fertilize if you have a really good nitrogen-rich compost that you're working with. So I encourage you to always think about, you want to give your plants a really good start, and making sure they have a real good soil medium to grow in is really important. So fertilizing. You can or you cannot, but most vegetables will most likely need some sort of fertilizer. You can use organic fertilizers. You can use whatever fertilizers you feel comfortable with, but because vegetables are producing, they're producing fruit or flowers, they need those nutrients to support that. And if your soil doesn't have that, you're just not going to see the production that you want. One thing to keep in mind, and I was kind of asked this out to the group, but because we're short on time, just know that some of the nutrients and fertilizers are quickly available, but then quickly dissipate, nitrogen being the main one. So you don't need to put more than you need because it quickly goes through the system. So only put at the root zone and when your plants need it. Those insoluble nutrients, they might need assistance from the environment to break down. So in the winter, when things are cooler, we usually don't recommend people applying fertilizer in the winter because it's just not going to be available because lots of the microbes and a lot of things have gone dormant. So you really want to apply fertilizer only when you know it's going to be taken up by the plant, so the plant is actively growing, and you want to put it in the place where that plant can get to it most, which is usually around the root zone, so that you're minimizing those nutrients, one going somewhere else, like into our water systems, or feeding something else, like that very large tree that's right next to your camellia. Here are some crops that, according might need more nitrogen to support them. So lettuce, cabbage, legumes, and then root and fruit crops. They usually need something at the beginning to get them established, but then on a yearly basis, you probably want to provide them some extra potassium so that they can develop their roots and their fruits. Watering, I mentioned this, good drainage, have a water source. Younger plants are going to need more frequent light irrigation until their roots are established. As plants get older, their roots are able to find more watering, so they might need more water, but less. And especially if we have a very rainy summer, you may not need to water it at all. The key for here is good drainage. If there isn't good drainage, you're going to struggle with your vegetables. And then some pest management tips. Rotate those vegetable families. Try not to grow things in the same place at the same time. Really make sure that your plants are healthy. Healthy plants tend to have their own defenses against a lot of pests. You can also try and grow plants that are going to encourage those beneficial insects to come in and help you control the more problem insects. Keep those plants growing. It's when they're weak that they're more susceptible to diseases and insects. And then monitor for those problems. Try and catch the problems early. I've had people bring in dead plants to me wanting to know if we can revive them, and I can't. So try and catch it early before it becomes a problem that you won't be able to fix. And then always harvest the ripe fruits or take out any dead material that could be a source of pathogens or disease. So sanitary stuff, making sure you're keeping everything clean. If you do want to use pesticides, make sure you're always following the label. The label is the law. Use the least toxic products first. Always check that label. It'll say, it'll usually have a caution word on it. Note those instructions. Try and apply when bees aren't around, especially if you have pollinators or you're growing pollinator plants. And then particularly with vegetables, I can't emphasize this enough. Make sure you're reading the label to know when is the last time you can apply pesticide without it impacting the quality of the fruit or whatever you're going to harvest. Okay, that's really, really important. And so that's why I only encourage you to use that in a scenario where you absolutely have to. So some keys to success: select a sunny and well-drained site. Improve that soil with organic matter. Figure out the right time to plant and match the plants to that timing that you have, so that you can avoid those insect and disease problems. Try varieties that are adapted to Florida. They're going to be the ones that do the best. And then, monitor, be out in that garden, checking it. You'll learn about the things that visit your gardens and the whole little ecosystems there. And you can provide care as needed. So I believe that is the end.
Well, thank you for presenting, Cynthia, and thank you all for joining us. We will look forward to seeing you back here in 2 weeks.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming and listening.